Welcome, friends. This is On the Barricades, and this is your most exciting weekly show delivered to you by The Barricade, the Eastern European lefties. And today we're going to be talking about Eastern Europe exactly and working class mobilizations. Our guest is s02e17. Thanks for coming on our show.
Thank you. It's my pleasure, my honor, and it's just a delight to be here, if I can say it like that.
Great. Likewise. Thanks for coming on. And look, you are in Romania. I mean, not necessarily you personally, although that stands for you as well. But you are in the middle of a working class mobilization, which I think is quite unprecedented. This is what I've discussed previously with our colleague Maria Cernat. And she kind of confirmed that, throughout her political lifetime, really, there's never been anything like that, or at least to this extent that we can observe right now. And complicated as it is, nuanced as it is, as every, fresh mobilization, social mobilization, it carries all kinds of, it takes all kinds of, and it carries in it all sorts of, political options, views, and so on and so forth. I want you to start off by drawing a larger picture of what is actually going on in Romania, okay? From the point of view of the mobilizations that I mentioned, in a way, how massive are they? What sectors are involved? What unions are there? What is the general attitude? And not necessarily maybe politically, but what is the general attitude in terms of the morale of the protesters? Are they, pushing forward? Is there a lot of backlash? Your government is very right-wing. So, help us, figure out what things are like in Romania now. And what are the elements that we should be excited about? And what are the potential dangers maybe looming that are potentially somehow endangering the growing movement?
So just to maybe start at first by talking about the protests, and let's call them the dissent movements. We're not witnessing only working class dissent movements, we're also witnessing what I think in the Western press has been described as being anti-vaccination, anti-restrictions protests and manifestations. They have started taking place in the past week, a bit more aggressively, in the sense that there have been thousands of people in major cities in Romania protesting. It's a very heterogeneous group, people protest against the mask, against certain individuals, against the government. Some of them burn masks. Some of them protest against the hospital. Some of them even went in front of the hospital and protested. Very heterogeneous group, but I think one thing that unites all of them is, in a sense, I would not call the spirit of rebellion, because that would imply that I think there is something so underlying to all of this, something like those people actually believe in liberty and freedom and all of that. I don't think it reached that point where articulation is that well done. I just think they're angry in the fact that the government has failed to provide a coherent response through this time, and also I think they're the products of, if we could call like this, social media propaganda, in the sense that there has been this beautiful report, I think, beautiful in the sense that I think it brings a lot of light, coming from Press One. I think it's one of my major publications in Romania of let's call it independent press, where they have investigated that one of the far-right candidate senators that we have right now has a bunch of fake accounts in that sense. She doesn't necessarily have them, but other people have created them in her name. And all of those cumulated, and usually they actually come from countries from outside Romania. So there are people in Malaysia, in the US, in Myanmar that actually control those accounts. They just sometimes put live videos of her on replay over and over again, which has contributed to people actually endorsing her to a certain extent and really believing in the cult of this personality. But this is just one phase of the protest. The working class protests, I think the working class is very much present in those protests as well. People that have lost their jobs, people that worked in precarious conditions, they're there in the streets. They're not protesting for the working class per se, they're just protesting for a variety of reasons. But if we're talking about the union protests, those have been taking place, I would say, for around 3 to 4 months at this point. They have started as, we could call them mild protests in a sense, just an exercise of practicing democratic rights. You bring the union to the streets when you want a certain law to be upheld, when you want certain benefits to be given to your workers. And this is what has happened. People were in the streets pushing for certain demands. Please do not freeze the wage increases. Please, let's draft this law once again. Please, let's try to work around the social dialogue, which is a very rusty law, which came into existence in 2011 during the neoliberal government. And can we maybe rephrase it? But ever since then, up until today, the message of the protest has changed dramatically, I would like to believe. Not all the unions are in the streets, but I think there are representatives from each one of them to a certain extent. The strongest unions that have reached the press nowadays have been the metro workers unions, the ones that work in the subway in Bucharest being the only city in Romania with a subway, and the police, which have actually managed to reach, I think, Associated Press. There was a report about them in the Associated Press in the world, in which they described how much of an aggressive turn they had, which is something that is not atypical for the police unions. The police unions in Romania are known to be, how can I say it, are not be a bit more cohesive. I think they are able to show solidarity with one another very well and very diligently. I don't necessarily think they're one of those unions that have this very leftist ideals, as we think of it, like anti-authoritarian and all of that, but they were able basically to rally very vehemently and very loudly against the government, which is the message that I think a bunch of the unions have picked up on. So if 4 months ago people were just trying to push for certain measures, now the message seems to be anti-governmental.
Okay, so let me just make sure that I understand correctly. Over the past 3 or 4 months, there was some kind of class unrest growing, not necessarily
Yep.
consciously class oriented, but class unrest in terms of, on the one hand we have the impoverished workers, and on the other hand we have the neoliberal, whatever, right-wing libertarian, I think even Maria Chatnut used the word, or libertarian-like government. And I think this is a classical class conflict, so to say, regardless of whether the people involved are kind of educated or knowledgeable in terms of the body of ideas that we represent somehow. But I think it's an important change, or I'd like to think it's an important change, because so far the class balance of forces, or the class disbalance of forces, was definitely in favor of the right wing, and in favor of the business, in favor of their political representatives, which is pretty much all of the parties, including to some extent even the Social Democrats. And it's likewise in Bulgaria, in a way that we have a socialist party which has a pro-business program, and it can't stress enough how much they like business. So but I'm just throwing that in. It's a separate conversation. What I want to say is that it seems interesting that union leaders are involved, and well, not only leaders but actually unions as organizations, union leaders and union rank and file members, and that there's growing radicalization. And why do I think it's important? Because, for example, in Bulgaria last year we've seen protests lasting for about half a year, and well, because there was no class component in it, or that's at least one of the reasons, the lack of any class component, they were no threat to anyone, because you can protest until the cows come home, and finally you gotta do something, right? You can't just spend all your days on the street shouting pretty much the same things to no avail in the final aftermath. So the fact that you had these class mobilizations, or mobilizations along class lines, okay, I think this is something very, very significant. And I would like to think, I mean, it could just evaporate sometime later, but I would like to think that it's a beginning of some kind of change. Not necessarily a change that tomorrow we're going to have a different, we're going to wake up in a different Romania, but we're going to wake up in a Romania which acknowledge, where the public opinion starts to acknowledge the voice of the organized labor. Okay, and do you think that it's a viable perspective that it actually could happen? Because you said about changing the language, but I think that except for the language, from what I remember, if my memory serves me well, there were some action. There was a lot of action, actually, not just words, in a sense that there were wildcat strikes, occupations, and you mentioned the metro workers, and obviously that's very important, and we wrote extensively about it on our Romanian website. But the miners, I think that's very important, like uranium miners. and other miners, coal miners, I guess. Can you kind of walk us through, because the radicalization that expressed itself, in this respect, in action, is also pretty symbolic, I guess, for what's going on right now in Romania. Or maybe
Definitely.
maybe it's wrong. Maybe my perspective is then just say,
No,
let me know
no,
if it's yeah.
No, I think it's a good overview of the Wildcat protests. So maybe strike, just for the ease of language, we could call them a Wildcat strike, even though in legal terms, it's not possible to be considered strike. But I think before I actually start a conversation about this, I think those events become even more important and get even more like let's say power when people on the left talk about them and people on the left try to win the workers over, which is something I think the left has, in a sense, not done enough of. I don't think it has failed precisely. I don't think it has done enough of, mostly because those strikes happen just, they can just happen impromptu overnight, basically. And it's hard for people to just go from one point to another in the country. And it's also maybe difficult since it's happening in a place where there might not be that much sympathy for certain progressive politics. And maybe people only think about the economic gains of it. But to dive a bit deeper into this, the Wildcat Strikes, so there have been the miners that have protested in the southwestern of Romania, which is a traditional mine, let's say, region. Nowadays, most of it is basically gone. It's disassembled. It has been basically, how can I say it, not prohibited, but has been heavily discouraged, the production of coal and exploitation of coal, more precisely, because of the UN guidelines, European Union, all of that. I don't think that's a problem itself. Green energy is beautiful and all of that. But what the big problem is the fact that those towns that used to be miners' towns, they didn't necessarily change to anything that could allow the prosperity, which was also relative, of the people to continue and to develop further to generations and generations. What was the common story of these towns is that you had mines here where people worked generations and generations. What you now have are basically, how in French they're called boulangeries. I think they're like pastry shops and gambling houses and secondhand shops. There is nothing else for you to do. So the dynamic of the town is completely changed. And the same narrative is viable for the uranium miners, which happened in the northeast of Romania for a couple of days, where they occupied the mines and refused to get out of the mines, and even threatened actually with hunger strikes, but never actually went to that place. Why those strikes are so important, I think, and I think the press and the left maybe could have done, and I hope they will do a better job at capturing them and actually emphasizing them a bit more and amplifying the voices of the workers, is that it can actually lead to, I think, a raising consciousness. And we've seen this on the ground. As you said, we have reported extensively on this Wildcat protest or strike that has happened to metro workers for the exact time of a day on the 26th of March, which was last Friday. And what happened with the strike was the fact that you basically had workers refuse to get outside of the underground. So basically they said that the metro will not function today, having a bunch of indication, having a bunch of demands, saying we don't want salary cuts, we don't want to be furloughed, we don't necessarily want the privatization of the metro, many demands. What is important about the strike is the fact that it was immediately antagonized and immediately politicized, and the parties were throwing from one to another. And I think what they did, apart from actually maybe hurting the unions to a certain extent, because yes, they portray the unions to be mafia-like institutions, which they've been doing for the past months and the past years, we cannot neglect the past years as well, is the fact that they also brought, I think, brought to daylight, or let's say put it in the public discussion, the idea of collective labor and what it means. And it showed people that basically there are certain key industries in Romania, and I really want to emphasize this key industry is very essential, because the metro is a key industry. If you block it, you basically like restrict the access, and the restricted access to transportation of 250,000 people from Bucharest. It's a huge protest, has a huge amplification. It basically can shut down a town if they want to. The same could happen with uranium miners. The same could happen with people working in those key industries, which have a lot of power. A lot of power, not necessarily in just pushing for their demands, but also showing that when workers want it, we can basically say we're out of this and we can shut down the town. And without us, you cannot function. And I think here is where we could do a bit better in trying to win those voices over rather than antagonizing them. Because what has happened with the metro workers protest has been, people have been quite angry about the fact that it happened during COVID time. indeed it happened during COVID time. It might lead to raising deaths, raising new cases, and all of this. We cannot ignore this. We need to acknowledge it. But at the same time, I think what other side of the picture that's completely ignored is to show that collective labor has power, basically. It has the power to become the main headlines in the news, only from this perspective, from the discursive perspective, for over a week, just by blocking something. Just imagine what power it could have by actually joining sides and deciding to not necessarily overthrow, but produce a significant change. So the power is there. I think people just now need to amplify it a bit more and actually realize how they can reach it.
Yeah, that's a very good conclusion. I like it, and but also I think your summation is very good of the general mood and the kind of swing in the consciousness that is at least beginning to appear. Okay, it's not maybe fully there, and we can expect it to be fully there, like within a matter of 2 or 3 months.
Do you mind if I say something very quickly? Because I wanted to say this, and I think it's very important. We realize it more and more nowadays that social media, I think, is a very dangerous ground, and I cannot stress this enough, honestly, because I think people that have a certain degree of critical education can make sense between what is a piece of fake news and what is not, to a certain degree.
Right.
They can also make sense when a certain outlet is purely propagandistic and one is actually informative. But what we actually see nowadays, and we've seen that after the metro strike, has been because Barricada got access to a bunch of groups of workers. We've seen that those workers are very easily drawn to basically far-right publications and more propagandistic publications. And it's not only because they purely believe this to be so, because I think if we believe this, there's no scandal with Facebook should ever occurred, but because the platform makes it possible for them to end up in these echo chambers. And I think the task sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to comment on this, that I fully agree, and I have been, if I have been known for something over the last couple of years, then one of the things would be that I call those platforms anti-social media, because they are genuinely antisocial. What they're doing is they're helping tearing apart the social fabric and destroying the culture of relations and deepening even further all the pathologies that the capitalist market model produces in culture. So I definitely side with you when you say that this is something very dangerous, because it kind of injects in people's minds all kind of weird ideas by just making them viral on where people go, and the phenomenon behind it, or maybe not behind it, but accompanying it, that people actually take their news from Twitter or from Facebook. This is really a dangerous trend, because what do you expect? Of course, you're going to get all kinds of conspiratorial nonsense spreading throughout society when you get people taking their news from Facebook, Twitter. Okay, so this is, but why do they go there? That's also another point and another question. That's probably not a conversation, but I just want to indicate it here, that there's so much disbelief, a justifiable disbelief, okay, towards the media. There's lack of trust in institutions, and there's, when you look at the political trends today in many Eastern European countries, you will see a terrible destruction of public faith, of public trust in the media, in the institutions, in the state, in politics, in political parties, and so on and so forth. And this, of course, is something that does not depend on us, does not depend on you or me or our outlets, because our reach is far too little for us being able to make an impact. But what is happening right now, and I totally sympathize with what you said and your conclusions, this is the moment for us to try and widen our audience, widen our readership, widen our influence, because these ideas of the anti-vaxxers that are also on the streets, people burning masks and all the rest of it, they can be convincing for a short while because they are spectacular, and they are about something which is definitely tiring for people. And I can imagine that for the Polish, for the Bulgarians, for the Romanians, for the French, for everyone, the conditions that we've been in for the last 14 months, okay, are terribly tiring, and they can lead people to do all kinds of weird, manifestations. Okay, I kind of, I'm against it, but I understand where it comes from and how it's been produced. So, but these are just momentary one-off things. I mean, I just don't believe that people are going to be able to mobilize. I don't know, okay, but I kind of suspect that it's rather impossible to keep people mobilized, okay, on the basis of we're not going to wear masks. Okay, I mean, you could
Yeah.
do that for one day, for 1 week, maybe for 1 month, but I don't believe it's a steady slogan or it's a steady postulate that, you know, people are going to gather around. And
No, this is true. Yeah.
even when you come to think of you know, the right-wing extremists, I mean, there are examples, okay, in history, recent history even, of classical, more or less classical fascist counter revolutions. Well, they don't happen around things like wearing masks or vaccines. So I think that, you know, the right wing in our countries, I'm no expert in Romania, but in our countries, like, you know, I'm based in Poland, I've got experience in Bulgaria. They are not really at the point where they are able to mobilize the masses to do some kind of destructive counter revolution that's going to smash the unions, smash any progressive ideas, and so on and so forth. So I'm thinking that for us, it's still a chance, despite the fact that, you know, part of the working class takes goes to these weird protests against masks and vaccines and so on and so forth. I think that the way of the working class mobilization is exactly where you explain, in the uranium mines, in the coal mines, and in the metro. And I think that the acquisition of knowledge that we can actually be a factor, because we can just, like this, stop a town, stop a city, and we can, you know, be that. It's a lesson for the working class, but it's also the lesson for the left. And I think the lesson for the left that should be drawn here, and I don't want to lecture anyone, but I really think it's very important, and I can't stress that enough. Our orientation towards the working class, and you know, you can read it in the Communist Manifesto or in other classical works. It's not a moral orientation that, you know, we feel that the workers are better, and that we feel that a worker would never go to an anti-vaccination demonstration. No, it's not about that. It's we have a strategic orientation towards the working class, because we know that the working class is capable of doing things that it just demonstrated in Romania to a certain extent. Okay, so we want to have them on our side in order to be able to confront the powers that be, and to be able to, you know, push for a better world, a major change, okay, a systemic change. So I just said all these things because I feel that, you know, the left does not have to do anything extraordinary. I mean, the left, what it has to do, it should just stick to certain classical elements like intervention in the labor movement, developing postulates, but most of all, trying to establish a link. And I think what you've done and what we've done through you, which is Barricada Romania, what we've done through you is exactly this. We put ourselves out there. You go to this demonstration, you try to speak to the workers, and, you know, some of them are very distrustful, which is very justifiable, as I said, because of the media, you know, how they treat the trade unions, how they've attacked them over the years, and so on and so forth. Some of them won't be able to talk to you, some of them will talk to you, and some of them will talk all kinds of nonsense, but some of them will tell you something meaningful. And this is how you do it. Like, you go there and try to figure out, you gather new contacts, you go there again, you know, you try to talk to their union leaders, you know, you don't lecture them on whatever they believe or don't believe regarding the coronavirus, but you just focus on the thing that is meaningful and a viable talking point in their fight that they're currently in. So I'm kind of, do you anticipate that this, I would say, common sense thing will be consumed by the left circles in Romania?
I hope it will be. I think it is already happening to a certain extent. It's just an issue of continuously doing it. I think what we've done at Barricada and has happened, I think it was just a bet. You know, we put a bet. Like, basically, we reached out, you know, to the Metro Union and said, because there was something peculiar, let's say, happening there. So after the strike basically ceased and they went into negotiation, the union started sharing lots of articles on their Facebook page. Those are coming from more or less, you know, controversial places. We could even say far right places to a certain extent, opportunist politicians that were just supporting the unions. Was the reason pro working class? That's up to dispute. But I think what we have identified there was the fact that there is now a big chance for those workers into falling even more into the trap of the far right. Not in the sense that they will go and vote for them, but imagine consuming this on Facebook, consuming this for the next 5 days, they'll recommend you this. And it's an even deeper echo chamber, if we can focus a bit on the anti-social media networks, as we've called them, is the fact that Romanians are part of many groups. There are many Facebook public groups or private groups which they join. And personally, I believe this should be like a ground of intervention for the left when you think about like publicity, when you think about trying to gain some kind of notoriety from the press, because I don't think it's necessarily our task of saving those people. I don't want to be like a martyr or savior or anything like that, because I think that would reach into the more individualistic aspect. And I think we'll actually distance ourselves a bit from the message. But what is essential actually is to put ourselves in those groups, which will probably render us very uncomfortable. They might be groups where like messages about the far right, about nationalizing industries, against certain minorities and all of that are shouted at the same time. There is no coherent discussion, yet this is the place where lots of working class people actually, gather online. I'm talking precisely. There are places where they interact with content, where they talk to one another, where they cheer themselves up. And we've seen this with our articles that we've published about the metro workers. We've published only 2, and they were shared immediately by many people. Many people joined and started liking the page just because they were shared in those specific groups. And they appeal to the language of the workers rather than trying to use a very robust wooden-like language, in which we're trying to describe what dialectical materialism means, the scientific role of the working class. And I don't know, citing Lukács, for example, we have appealed to them basically by just saying what they already know. And I think this is an observation I have. It might be an overestimation, but I think lots of Romanian people, working class peasants, they're very socialist at heart, at least economically. I think they're heavily socialist at heart, yet they don't have a clear articulation of their beliefs. And I think this is where the far right is so ingenious, and it's like so genius at acting, because those strikes which I've mentioned previously, the metro strike, they weren't able to, let's say, take over it. But the uranium miners and the miner strike, the far right was present there in both cases. They made promotional videos, they talked to the workers. They even had like talking sessions in the parliament where they discussed lots of the issues. One of the far right leaders even like showed up to a trade union congress that happened a month ago, and talked about the need to reindustrialize Romania, which isn't necessarily a left-wing policy. It's just like a policy of, yes, we need more industry. But what's so interesting about this group is that it's able to get to very key identity groups, the miners, the disaffected miners, and to use the language of, let's say, of populistic, nationalistic language to basically get people to come closer to them. People in Romania are I don't want to say ashamed, but they're angry that we don't have the industry anymore. People in my town, which used to be an industrial town, are completely like devastated because we are turned into a town where only consumption is happening, where there are supermarkets everywhere and gambling houses at every stop. Basically, and we don't have anything yet that produces anymore. And I think this is something that they actually are able to appeal to. They're able to appeal to emotions, and the emotional labor that this group does is immense. Because they are able to pick these very specific feelings, was the case with the miners, portraying them as the people who have lost the most. And it's true, they have lost a lot in Romania, and being able to instrumentalize them and use them against anything else that is in Romania, like progressive politics. And sometimes I'm wondering, like, will they use them for the benefit of the people? Will instrumentalizing those groups will actually make their life better? I am not sure about this. I don't personally think so.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I think it just like, there are some tactical decisions that the right wing makes, and there is a recent history of that. For example, when you take the far right German party, AfD, Alternative for Germany, right? Then, when you look at what they stand for, I really, and even a Romanian author wrote that on our webpage, that they are a liberal party. Really, they are a liberal party. I mean, there are some, conservative traits, but it's rather for tactical reasons. I mean, it's just now there in order to score some points, okay, in a given political season. And I think it's the same with your right wing in a way that now they see workers' mobilizations, trade unions and something, and, lack of industry, deindustrialization and general, kind of economic downgrade, right? So, they can see that, so they can go there and they can score some points. And of course, they're going to, screw them over, like the workers and as a class or individually as a labor organization, that organizes this or is behind the organization of those strikes. So I have no doubt. And sooner or later, of course, disappointment is going to come, even if momentarily the right wing can somehow have their, their 5 seconds there. So I think that for us, for the left, it's important to prepare at least for this, for the moment of disappointment, and go there and offer something. Because you see, what you talked about, like the question of going to the working class and going to the protests, trying to link up with them. This is all so basic. I mean, this is just like ABC. You don't really, you really don't have to be a Marxist, okay, in order to get to that point. So, and for example, when I spoke about that, many times on left forums, in the internet and outside the internet in Poland, since for the last couple of years, and the reaction of the left, or at least of the leaders, was pretty much nothing. I mean, you can speak about it, and then they've got like tons of other initiatives. Okay, and it could be about green energy, it could be about I don't know, gender issues, it could be about all kinds of stuff, and I can see that they've got hands full of work. The problem is only that, we keep ignoring the working class and the question of the working class mobilization and the kind of strategic orientation that we have, because the working class has not been on the move for many years in our countries. So it's easy to kind of be, neglected and stuff like that. But now it's a great moment of perhaps some kind of awakening. And, I want to ask you, because you said that perhaps it actually does make sense for the left to responsibly intervene also on social media in some particular groups and stuff like that, because there are working class voices that could be heard there, and they are consumed or somehow managed by the right wing, and you could contradict that and stuff. Now, okay, I kind of accept that, but I want to ask the question: how do you protect yourself? How do you insulate from falling for all kinds of social media, anti-social media nonsense? Because any kind of entry that you put in such a group could easily turn into a meaningless shitstorm that is gonna consume your time, consume your energy, and sort of throw you up, and you're going to be disappointed, disillusioned, and finally going to give up on everything because you spent I don't know, half a day or 2 days arguing with strangers on the internet and getting no validation, basically, including from workers maybe that you would be hoping for. And so I just want to ask for some kind of maybe tactical advice for the people who are going to fall for it and going to go and argue in these groups.
Yeah, it's gonna be a trial and error. I am not going to lie. It's not gonna be pleasant. If you look at our articles on the Romanian page, you see accusations even against me of what will I do if I want a raise in salary, and people even like make personal comments and personal attacks. I think we should get used to it. It's a dirty job at the end of the day. I think this is what organizing is. You put your rubber boots, you put your rubber gloves on, and you go through piles of shit. Excuse my language.
Yeah.
It is not like it is not like you walk on a pre-created path on which like everything is beautiful, rainbows, and you just that would be amazing. That would be indeed amazing. But I remember actually what we were talking once in one of our internal meetings, I think with Cecilia from Other News, and she was talking about this idea of, I think we owe something to our ancestors, owing something to the past, which is a very emotional, very moral aspect, which sometimes I don't buy into, but I bought into that specific aspect because when you think about the benefits or the privileges we now enjoy, definitely not developed to its fullest. Like for example, the working day that is 8 hours in theory at least, maternal leave, vacation, all of this, like those were not won by just walking pleasantly or peacefully on a street. They were won through struggle.
We're debating it. Yeah.
Exactly, they were won through struggle, and one key struggle I think we need to think more nowadays is infiltrating those places which are heavily regressive, heavily hostile. And I mean, for those of us that actually can do this, because I don't think someone should go in those groups who is not willing and who doesn't expect to actually be threatened, because it will happen at the point. You will get people that will actually threaten you, that will actually insult you in all ways possibles, because certain people, this is what they do. But I think the work of an organizer, and I think people, this is this beautiful podcast, I think, and there's been an article in N+1 magazine called Spade Work, in which they were talking about organizing. You are not organizing the people with the beliefs, the same beliefs as you. You're organizing the people that are most likely to reject your beliefs. And in organizing those people, there is a lot of work and a lot of struggle. And I think with social media precisely, it must be something continuous. It must be a one-on-one relationship developed beyond the share button, because when you press share, countless people can see it, yes, but there can be something else done where you infiltrate these groups and you share to certain individuals, where you share to certain institutions that then have the power to share to their own groups as well, which I think is what happened with the metro. Because there was so much heavy press on the metro union, everyone hated them. People just disliked them. You basically shut down the country. All of this, the press loved to antagonize the workers even more. But what not so many voices in the press did was, I think, what we've done to a certain extent, actually acknowledge it's a chaotic situation. It's hard to reach a conclusion. We might never ever reach a conclusion. But the only certainty we have in here is that the workers were actually just like a ping pong ball, thrown from one political party to another. I think that has allowed us to basically enter into their own sphere and appeal to their own feelings, and the union was able to share it. And I remember they shared it to their own groups, and the individual shared it as well, because they felt like someone was finally listening to them. But what also helped in this,
that's really critical here. Yeah.
What also helped is one-on-one conversations. I don't think it's enough to post, but here it depends a lot on the amount of labor you can actually put into the movement, into your organization, everything. I don't think everyone is able to do this, because I said previously, it can be not dangerous in the sense that someone will actually kill you or hurt you, but dangerous in the sense that you might put your mental health at work. And I think if you're not in a stable position, having someone swear at you and maybe want to kill some ethnic minority at the same time is not an idea.
Yeah, I know it could be difficult, but I still encourage people to put themselves out there, because this is how you actually you are able to cross the boundary. I mean, there's this modern concept of comfort zone, and I think we should be stepping out of our comfort zones, because and I think unions and strikes and mass organizations in general are very important from that point of view. Actually, we spoke about that extensively with our guest Pat Byrne in the series Divided We Fall, that the left-wing activists, they should go to mass organizations. They don't necessarily have to become members, but they should go there and work with them, regardless of what the situation is in a given place or in a given country or in a given time, because there you are going to meet with people and be confronted with people who have different ideas than you. Whereas in the social media, you normally meet people who have the same ideas, which is largely referred to as the bubble. And I think it's important to be able to speak to people outside the bubble. Yeah. But I also want to ask the question, of course, if you have a thought, then please go ahead and finish. But I have the question, where are the social democrats in all of this?
Yeah, the social democrats, I think they were part of the war of throwing the ping pong ball to one another. There were multiple voices. I think there was a mayhem that even started amongst them. Certain people accusing each other of not utilizing the strike strategically, others saying that they were not working class enough. On a larger picture, they were stuck in this politicized event of you are to blame, no, you are to blame, you are to blame, we're all to blame, and all of this. But what is important, I think, about what you said, and also just to know, this is quite typical of the social democrats at this point. We don't have the SPD of Weimar Germany, or even previous to World War I Germany. We don't have that. I don't think it even resembles that closely. The social democrats of Romania are, to a certain extent, a heterogeneous group as well. You get very conservative people, and then you get a bit more progressive as well. So there isn't a coherent voice. But what is so interesting about what you said previously, I was thinking of the case of my friend, of Alex, I think. Yeah, Alex, who's from a nearby town where I live. and he has been so good at actually utilizing the football team, the local football team, and the local hooligan culture. So for people that do not know it, hooligans are basically the very, let's say, aggressive and maybe passionate football supporters that
Yeah, but
could
they're normally
go.
right wing. I mean, at least from what I gather.
They're normal writing, but this is why I think he was so smart. He made his
Mm.
pause. He identified that the hooligans, specifically in Romania, are very right wing. But he said that if we never infiltrate this, and especially if we never infiltrate the groups in a team which is fairly young, doesn't yet have a strong hooligan culture, what we can actually do, what we do is that we'll just like leave them for the right to take once again. We'll lose another team to the right. What they've done basically is they've mobilized enough people on the left that were also fans of football, and they infiltrated the hooligan groups. They never won over them, but they were able to maintain such a strong opposition to the dominant right-wing hegemony in there that they were able to actually pose a different narrative, which I think is beautiful.
Like an interesting experiment. Absolutely. Yeah.
Definitely. Oh, like in the end, definitely they had to, the experiment to a certain extent collapsed because also the hooligan group as a whole collapsed. There were certain problems in there, but the fact that they intervened in there and they were actually willing to put their bodies, where their words are, but I think it's something very brave.
Yeah, it's brave, but it's also very, I think, symbolic because, going to infiltrate a group of aggressive young men, okay, is much more dangerous in terms of putting yourself out there than just going to a union meeting where some of the people could be right-wing or anti-vaxxers or whatever. But I think it's much more safe from the point of view of maintaining, like a proper health status, like be it mentally or physically or whatever. So, congratulations, of course, on this perfectly legitimate experiment to start. I mean, I will, in the past, when I was younger, I said I will go to the Boy Scouts, even if needed to just go and score some points for the left ideas. I don't know whether Boy Scouts exist anymore, but
they do. They're very strong institution.
Right. So that's a different conversation. So you advise basically people that are going to be part of any kind of campaign on the internet to be very careful and not to just go there and succumb to the culture of ongoing, shitstorms and stuff like that, but to carefully choose where do they want to share their message and what do they want to get from it. In a way, like if you want to engage in dialogue with someone or with some group, then go ahead and do that, but make sure that you actually stay focused on this and not get distracted by all kinds of nonsensical comments that we've been getting, for example, on our website underneath your entries and articles and so on and so forth. So yeah, I mean that's something that I'm kind of prepared to accept, regardless of my skepticism to social media. But I wonder because we spent some time deliberating on social media, and I would like to have a conclusion in vis-a-vis the strike that is or the protest or the mood that is developing in the society. Because I've always had this kind of thought in my head that many people think that we lost a lot because of the internet, that we lost a lot because many comrades, many activists, many people, valuable people, they're so invested in those internet struggles that, they've given up on acting in reality, in the material reality around us. And, I've always thought it's not the case. I thought that some people, yeah, definitely, they did drown in this mud, but not so many of them. Actually, what we see in the internet is like a generation of people, particularly in Poland, for example, where the left isn't really so large. I mean, we're not a group of friends, but we pretty much know each other, okay, from various places, protests, mobilizations, internet groups, and so on and so forth. So, those that are invested so much in this, in these pathological phenomenon, okay, I don't know them. I mean, it's different group of people. So, my conclusion is rather than we've lost anything, is that no, we haven't lost anything. It's just there are some people, many of them, in my opinion, poorly adjusted to reality. That's why they choose to be active only in the internet, and there are still comrades out there, those that used to be active 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and I think that moments like that are able to bring them back into life and to start having what we used to have in many places, I mean, I don't know whether that's the experience of Romania, but for example, in the 90s in Poland, we've had an active left, and I'm talking about really active left, where people used to do a lot of things. I used to belong to an organization, a socialist organization, in times when socialism was like almost a swear word, okay, in the end of the 90s, because of the aggressive anti-communist agenda. I used to belong to a socialist organization of 3,000 or 4,000 members. Okay, so despite the fact that the attacks were so vicious, we were able to actually do something because there was a lot of belief, a lot of faith, a lot of morality. The morality was high. Okay, and there was many causes. Okay, and people were not that adjusted at the time to the ongoing pathologies. Okay, the market was growing, the unemployment was growing, the crime was growing, everything, and people were against that. Now people seem to be much more able to accommodate all those things, and I think this made us passive to a large extent. And at the same time, there are many people, okay, numbers of people, young people in particular, that want to go out on the street, because we've seen that in Poland, for example, last fall during the women's strike protests. I mean, majority of the people that formed what is largely referred to as the next to or the second largest demonstration in the modern history of Poland, okay, that happened, I think, on the 31st, I guess, of October last year. Then the majority of the people, 80% of the people that took part in this, they were for the first time ever on any demonstration. So I'm just thinking, do you share the kind of perspective that I just drew up here, or do you think that it's something else in Romania? Yeah, or
No,
maybe.
no, I agree with you. I'm an optimist myself, to be honest. I don't let myself, fall into the traps of pessimism and saying that we need to be like back in Weimar Germany or interwar certain countries, to actually be an active left. No, I think we should, if we are actually committed to a leftist project, regardless of what it can be, because here is a long conversation as well, we must first of all, as you said, pay attention to the material conditions of existence, to the material reality, what we have outside, and see how we can utilize that to our own project. And we've seen it, like, yes, the case in Poland is true. We've seen the youth in Romania protesting against corruption, protesting against certain justice laws, protesting against the what was it? It was Roșia Montana with the mines, with the gold exploitation, when they basically wanted to exploit the gold in such a damaging way to the planet. So the people are actually in the streets. And I want to reemphasize again, I think deep down in the souls of the people, and I don't want to be accused of being like a preacher, like a priest or something, but I really think that if you go and talk on the streets with the people, with the poor people, beggars, I do not know, anyone that works like on a minimum wage or very close to it, that is usually considered to be a conservative for hating certain more progressive ideals, which is true, we'll never be able to deny that. At heart, I actually still believe in some kind of economic equality. And I think we need to get somehow that out of them and like even further re-emphasize it.
Yeah, and we should also employ emotions, I guess, because that's what the right wing is doing, and we don't really have any romantic, interesting vision, inspiring things. So that's something that we got to work on as well. Yeah. But thanks so much for stressing on optimism. I think this is one of our.
If I can say,
yeah, sure.
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah,
I think I was actually having a conversation with my professor David Collins and a couple of days ago, and we were talking about the biggest fear of a progressive, especially on a university campus, is to be called that he's not a progressive.
Yeah.
So basically, I think this is a huge problem. We need to overcome. Like, yes, there are problems. There are certain misarguments. Some people do not realize the privilege they have. Some people do not realize how class reductionist they are. Some people do not realize certain racist, transphobic arguments or something like that. But a mistake should not limit you from taking action. This is what I think the culture of accountability is so much stronger, because you look back into those partisan movements, and I think one reason they succeeded was because they were able to hold each other accountable and confront each other. And I would like to go back just for a second to one of your previous points, where you're criticizing the comfort culture. The comfort culture does this, it creates certain spaces in which basically the point for mistake is very little, and you yourself are afraid of being held accountable. I think you should not be afraid of being held accountable. I think you should actually engage actively with that, because my mother, who is a bit more militaristic, has to say that if you compliment a child too much, you basically tell them to fuck off. They will not progress any further in life. You basically just reinforce what they already know. Let them experience, man. Like let them be hit by life. Let them rise up and be held by others accountable.
Let people take risks. That's also,
let people take risks, and let them be criticized and criticized at the same time. They should not be afraid of being called out something and then be like, I'm not something anymore. No, dude, do it.
Absolutely. And people should be, we should allow, and I think this is my biggest problem with whatever the kind of the caricature of accountability that we have now, which is like cancel culture, whatever you want to call it, is exactly that. I mean, people should be able to make a case, regardless of who they are, regardless of what they used to say 5 years ago somewhere on some platform. They should be able to make a case and then argue against the case, not against the person. And I think that's just a common sense thing. And you're right, there are many things to overcome. But also, I think the basis here is that, the lefties, they should stop pretending that they are someone exceptional, because we have the tendency to think about us that we're exceptional. We know so much about the world, about the social and economic conditions, about Marxism, whatever, and stuff like that. We're so expert. We've got so much of an expertise when it comes to the policing of language and stuff like. So
I agree.
And in the final aftermath, when you go to a miners' strike, to a subway trains engineers strike, whatever, you go there, you just what you actually are, another guy with an opinion. That's what you are.
That's true. That's true. I agree 100%. Just one last word is that I think a lot of work should be done on realizing who we could have been if we didn't have the let's say certain economic privileges that so certain of us have on the left, like a stable income, a stable housing. If we didn't have this, we could have been racist very easily, and maybe lots of us were actually in the past. And the first job is actually realizing how the social context influences this, rather than, as you said, consider ourselves to be like saints and outside of this.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. It's a very good conclusion. But I would just want to go back for the last 30 seconds to what you said about optimism. I think this is very, very, very important. I mean, we should be optimistic regardless of how critical we are about whatever the environment we work in, or the conditions that we have to face, or the hardships that we have to endure as political activists and organizers and campaigners and so on and so forth. Because we spoke about cancel culture. We spoke about this anti-social media. We spoke about all these trends that are very worrisome and that are affecting the left. But there is another trend, which I think is the kind of the one kind of umbrelling, if that's a word, all those, which is pessimism. I think there's a lot pessimism on the left, and I think it's largely due to the fact that we've kind of given up on many of our initial ideas on the notion of better world, socialist organization of society and economy, and so on and so forth. I don't want to go into that, but then because of this pessimism and because of a lack of response within the left wing circles, regardless of whether we're talking about social democratic or communist organizations or whatever, there's been lack of response to that. And I think that many activists have just embraced this kind of dystopian thinking that some major act of destruction is actually going to save us. Not major act of building, but major act of there should be less people, there should be less industry, there should be less of anything, so the kind of anti-civilizational approach that you can trace back maybe to some to the beginning of the Enlightenment, something like that, right? It's just off the top of my head right now. I mean, if I think more about it, then probably I could find some trends like this later on. But this kind of postmodern lack of will to actually politically, philosophically, morally develop, and just this us being stuck in the kind of, that's very pessimistic, and I think that's very turning off for many people. And it's also it's also affected us in terms of the message we're trying to convey. I mean, how are you going to win anyone with the slogan that there should be less people? They're going to tell you, well, start with yourself, and this is I think crucial. So thanks a lot for the conversation. Thanks a lot for bringing the question of optimism, because I really think it's crucial, and we should be optimistic, and we should be drawing optimistic and inspiring perspectives and messages and slogans and so on and so forth. And I'm really glad for you know, being part of the intervention in the movement or in the strike, okay, in particularly the metro workers. I think that's very important. Thanks for your work and
Thank you as well.
articles that we put out on the Romanian barricada. And we're going to follow. Okay, we're going to be following up the situation, and we're going to have more discussions like that, hopefully with even more optimistic elements in them. Let's see how things are going to develop. All the best to everyone. Stay healthy. Thanks again, Radu, for joining us. Thanks a lot. Stay healthy. Ciao.
Thank you.
The Barricade is an independent left-wing media platform. If you like this video, click subscribe. You can support us on patreon.com/thebarricade.